Hello and welcome to this week's edition of World Today. I'm Geeta Mohan reporting from Moscow, and in the next half hour we'll talk about the geopolitical conditions and the crisis looming large over the world due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. US President Joe Biden visited Eastern European countries this week, Belgium and Poland, and held trio meet with the NATO member states, EU and G7. Countries deciding on strategies to counter Russia, humanitarian aid and further sanctions, but nothing more.
Putin war machine rolls on, slowly but with no signs of stopping. The raging war has galvanized the West to get its act together. The urgency evident as United States President Joe Biden air dashed to Brussels for a power-packed Thursday. 3 unprecedented back-to-back emergency summits of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization or NATO, G7 nations and the European Union. The aim is to take more punitive measures against Russia and add more muscle to Ukraine's defenses.
We believe in democracy, in the rule of law, in the defense of human rights, in the values that underpin all of our societies. That's why this illegal, brutal invasion of a friendly democracy in Ukraine by Vladimir Putin is absolutely unacceptable. NATO and partners around the world are united in condemning and standing up to Russia.
The West's options are limited. It has already declared it won't join the war. What their military alliance NATO would do is strengthen its defenses in Eastern European member nations by sending more troops and equipment. It will also supply more arms and ammunition to Ukraine to fight any escalation by the invading Russian forces. But they also need to calibrate a response to frequent nuclear saber-rattling by Russia. The West's assistance, however, might not be enough to satisfy Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He wants the West to be more proactive.
На цих 3 самітах буде наша позиція, міцна позиція. На цих 3 самітах ми побачимо, хто друг, хто партнер, а хто продався і зрадив. Життя можна захистити тільки у єдності. Свобода, вона має бути озброєною.
There are reasons for Zelensky to be disappointed. While the US and its allies have imposed many sanctions on Russia, Europe still buys gas from Moscow. Ukrainian voices have time and again complained that doing business with Moscow is as good as financing the war. Western nations, meanwhile, have announced fresh sanctions to corner Russia. The United Kingdom has slapped 65 more sanctions against Russian business groups and individuals, including the Wagner Group, described as Putin's private army, and Russian Foreign Minister's stepdaughter, Polina Kovaleva. But will all this be enough to stop the war? A top European Union diplomat, Josep Borrell, has warned Russia will not be serious about peace talks until it secures itself a position of strength. The war may not be ending anytime soon. With Gaurav Sawant in Warsaw, Poland, and Geeta Mohan in Moscow, Bureau Report, India Today.
As I travelled around Moscow, I looked at the impact the EU and US sanctions have had on Russia. Here is a report. Russia is one of the most sanctioned regimes in the world, a country that has learned to live with sanctions, and is the reason why, although sanctions this time are harsher, Russia still continues to live with them. And if you see the domestic structure over here and the financial institutions, they're working as normally as can be. People are not feeling the brunt of it really right now, but at a macro level, for people who are involved in foreign trade, it is a huge problem since international institutions have shut operations. Alpha Bank is one of the largest banks in Russia and is open. Speaking to a few people over here, they say that they've not had any problems, although Moscow did hit the panic button after the 24th of February, and many of them queued up outside of ATM machines. But it seems like right now things have gone back to normal because they are being able to withdraw money, and there are many European banks that have still not shut operations. This is the Credit Europe Bank that has not shut operations. Raiffeisen Bank, which is one of the biggest banks operating in Russia, is called a Russian bank, but the parent company is Austrian, still functioning here in Moscow, in Russia, and many other banks, including Russia Bank, are operating. People are being able to withdraw money. There are problems with using cards, but they have been using plastic cards, which is a form of digital currency and money. Are the banks working normally? Can you withdraw money? Are you facing problems?
No, I don't have problems.
Okay. Is there any difficulty with regards to banking in Russia?
No.
No? Louis Vuitton and many other international brands have shut operations here in Russia, but this is what the message of the Russian people is. The message over here with massive posters being put on the display windows of Louis Vuitton showroom here in Moscow, which says goodbye. It says goodbye. It says goodbye Denmark, goodbye Sweden, goodbye many other Eastern European countries. The message over here by certain quarters in Russia is that they do not require these international brands if it means compromising Russia's security.
Now I can pay only Russian clothes. It's normal, okay. But I like different countries, from different countries clothes. This is no important problem.
It's большой. It's a very big shame.
Okay.
I think.
Okay. And you think that this should not have happened, this action inside Ukraine? Why?
Вы думаете, это не должно было?
Конечно, нет.
А кто же?
Why?
Почему?
Убийство людей это неправильно.
Killing people is never good.
I'm here at one of the largest malls in Moscow, and which actually houses most of the international brands, and quite a few of the international brands have stopped operations here in Moscow, in Russia. This is Bulgari. The door doesn't open, and the shop is shut. But there are quite a few other international brands who have not stopped operations over here. Brunello Cucinelli is still open and operational, but Dior, on the other hand, on this side, not open. There are sanctions, and a lot of countries, a lot of companies have taken a stand to stop operations and shut shops. But not all of them have done that, which just goes to show that there is disparity in how the world and how businesses are viewing this entire crisis.
Half of brands have left our market. I don't know for how long, but they'll come back, I'm convinced.
Yet another nuclear attack threat by Putin in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesperson said should there be escalation and existential threat, Russia could resort to nuke attacks. Earlier, Putin activated Russia's nuclear forces. Here's a report.
Relentless onslaught on Ukraine. Ravaged cities, hundreds of casualties, but not much headway in winning the war. With its Ukraine offensive sputtering, Russia came out with yet another brazen nuclear threat, daring the West using its enormous nuclear stockpile. Refusing to rule out use of nuclear power, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov asserted that Russia would only use nuclear weapons in context of the ongoing war in Ukraine if there was an existential threat. He said Russia has a concept of domestic security and it's public, and that the reasons for nuclear arms to be used was there for everyone to see. While existential threat can mean anything Putin deems fit, this is not the first time Russia has flexed muscle and hinted at a nuclear attack. On February 28, Putin asked his defense forces to put nuclear deterrence on high alert.
приказываю министру обороны и начальнику генерального штаба перевести силы сдерживания российской армии в особый режим несения боевого дежурства.
Putin has also shown eagerness to capture Ukrainian nuke plants, evident from his attacks on premises of Zaporizhzhia plant and destruction of a Chernobyl lab. But what's forcing Russia to resort to nuke threats? Is Putin merely flexing his nuclear muscle, or is it dangerous brinkmanship after failure to win the war even 4 weeks into the invasion? With Geeta Mohan in Moscow, Bureau Report, India Today.
Time for a short break. When we return, we'll talk about the scenarios that are playing out and the warnings of a World War III that's playing out here in Russia and across the world. Stay tuned. Even as the conflict rages on, there are growing fears of a global conflict. This even as the Western world has rejected Ukraine's demand of a no-fly zone. NATO is a silent spectator, with EU and United States of America imposing more sanctions. Can there be a way forward? Here's a report that decodes the ghost of another world war.
The war in Ukraine is now a month old and counting. But not for a moment has this been just Ukraine's fight. From the very beginning of the invasion, it has had all the tremors of the global conflict. Those leading the crisis themselves warn that World War III could be ahead. Russia first triggered the ghost of a global war by placing its nuclear weapons on high alert in February, following the move with a warning that World War III would have to be nuclear and destructive.
Всем понятно, что Третья мировая может быть только ядерной. Но, обращаю ваше внимание,
everybody understands that World War III can only be nuclear. It is in the heads of the Western politicians that nuclear war is always revolving and not in the heads of the Russians.
уверяю, что мы не позволим.
That is why I assure you that we will not allow any provocations to force us out of the balance. But if a real war against us starts developing, those who carry out such plans must have a think.
Реальную войну, ну, это, наверное, должны думать об этом те, кто такие планы вынашивает, а они...
Amidst Ukraine's sustained pleas for NATO to impose a no-fly zone over the invaded nation, Russia raised the spectre again, warning that any such move could trigger a third world war. And that's probably the reason why, despite vehemently condemning Russia, the US or the European Union have rejected Zelensky's demand to declare Ukraine's airspace a no-fly zone. Wars were fought in Iraq, Syria, and also between two of the biggest nations, China and India. But never before did the risk of World War III look as serious as it does now amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. On a military scale, Russia's Ukraine war is limited. Yet the risk of World War III is bigger than ever and could just be a trigger away. Till now, Europe or America have refrained from sending troops to fight against Russia, limiting their response to sanctions and military aid. So why is the ghost of another world war so strong? World War is the name given to two multilateral wars that were essentially European. The First World War, fought during 1914 to 19, mainly involved Germany, Austria-Hungary and Turkey against the Allies, France, the UK, Soviet Russia, Italy, Japan, and from 1917, the United States. The Second World War, fought between 1939 to 1945, mainly involved Germany, Italy and Japan against France, UK, US and Soviet Russia. As the stakes pile up, as the pressure builds, and as the implications mount for Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war has the potential for a bigger war, both in weaponry and geography. Will NATO be pushed to impose a no-fly zone? And is that the one move separating the world from World War III? Bureau Report, India Today.
Make no mistake, this right here is Cold War 2.0. Russia and the United States of America are once again head-to-head. Nuclear forces of global powers are on high alert and the world has realigned. What does it mean for geopolitics of the world and a world order? I decode.
Cut forward a few decades and a very hot war in Ukraine has a cloud of the old Cold War all around it. Sit back while we prove to you that we are in Cold War 2.0. Proof 1. Direct US-Russia tension. The first piece of proof, the war in Ukraine has sparked the most high-level tensions between the US and Russia in decades, with both superpowers reviving historic angst to paint each other as global imperialistic aggressors running roughshod over world peace.
Did you ask me whether I would call? Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
Proof 2. Big global realignment. The second piece of proof is the global realignment of the international order. Hugely reminiscent of Cold War pressures, complex linkages aside, the world stands massed against Russia, its ally China, a neutral India, with the United States making it clear to nations that they are against Russia or with Russia. The crisis in Ukraine is visible, crafting a new world order. Proof 3. Nuke forces on high alert. The most tangible revival of Cold War tensions is clear in Russia's move to place its nuclear forces on high alert in the wake of NATO movements to help Ukraine. The move by Putin, explained away as a defensive posture by Moscow, has ratcheted up nuclear tensions to dangerous Cold War levels, forcing other nuclear nations, by most accounts, to keep their nukes dusted and ready too. Proof 4. Biowarfare allegations. The allegations of biological weapons laboratories and experimentation with germ warfare are also typical of the Cold War era crossfire. Russia threw the first punch in the current crisis by accusing the US of maintaining biowarfare facilities on Ukrainian soil. The US hit back, saying Putin intends to use bioweapons of his own, and the allegation is just cover fire for his own insidious intentions. Proof 5. Isolation through airspace. With several nations closing their airspace to Russia, the sense of geographic isolation has heightened dramatically in the first few weeks of the Ukraine invasion. With few flights in and out of Russia, the alienation of a superpower is palpable and in many ways is even more than how it was during the Cold War. Proof 6. Moscow unplugged from global economy. The crippling sanctions against Russia haven't slowed Putin's military rumble in Ukraine, but Russian citizens are most definitely feeling the heat. A Soviet-era arrogance that Russia can survive without the global economy is also representative of Cold War-era confidence. The suggestion that the world needs Russia more than Russia needs the world. Proof 7. Mass mobilization across Europe. Perhaps the most visible manifestation of a new Cold War, the readiness of militaries in Europe across NATO nations and the move of several other countries like Finland to consider joining NATO, creating a spectre of the Russian menace. The suggestion that it's Ukraine today and the other countries next, painting a scary Cold War scenario that goes just beyond the cold. There's real combat taking place in Ukraine for a whole month and counting. One thing is certain, whenever that battle ends, Cold War 2.0 won't end anytime soon. With Shivarur, Bureau Report, India Today.
All in this week's edition of World Today from Moscow. Next week, we'll bring you reports from the Donbas region. Stay safe and take care.